Oh, it is working. Okay. I was going to say, is the mic working? So hello, thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. As Kathy said, I live here in Rutland. I've lived in Rutland, in this area, since 1997. And in June, or sometime earlier in the summer, Kathy asked if I would come and talk about the Paris Olympics, which were coming up. And I said, well, I didn't know what the Paris Olympics were going to be like at that point, but I said I can really only talk about the Paris Olympics without talking about the 7 other Olympics that have led up to Paris, because as she noted, some have been better than others. So I thought I'd take you on the whole journey, and I hope my PowerPoint works. So I was raised in Lyndonville, Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom. I was not born in Vermont, though. I was born in Connecticut. My dad was hired by Lyndon State College to teach English, so we moved to Vermont when I was 3. My mom's family is from Cabot. She was raised there, and actually I'm an 8th generation Vermonter. My family's from Hardwick, East Hardwick. So my mom skied. She grew up skiing at Mount Mansfield. You know, before the lift, you had to walk up. So she had me and my sister on skis. I was on skis at age 3. In the backyard at the Linden Outing Club with its rope tow. Burke Mountain, my mom took us to Stowe one day. That's my older sister with the fashionable red headband on, and I'm in the blue, missing my front teeth. I think I'm 6 years old here. I loved skiing. I loved the freedom. I loved being outdoors. I loved playing in the snow. I loved going fast. But I did not go fast enough to be in the Olympics. I wanted to be in the Olympics, and I thought I could go. I told my parents I was going to go in either skiing, swimming, or figure skating, and if I couldn't do that, I'd go in something easy like track and field. But I never made it. And my racing career, ski racing was cut short when I was dispatched to boarding school in high school to New Hampshire. We didn't have a ski team, but I did learn how to write. So I moved out west after college, and I started bicycle racing, and that was about the closest I came to the Olympics. I got into science and engineering because my older sister, here in the red headband, had told me that she was going to be the writer in the family, and I had to be good in math and science. She also told me that my favorite color had to be red because hers was blue, but notice who's in blue and who's in red. So I forced myself. I was kind of a round peg in a square hole. I actually have a master's degree in environmental engineering, but I really didn't like it. And I went to talk to a career counselor, and she had me write some stories about things I liked to do when I was little. And I, of course, wrote about skiing. And she looked at me and said, "Why are you at the Colorado School of Mines? You need to be a writer." And I said, "I know, but my sister told me I can." So at my 10th college reunion, I reconnected with a friend at Amherst. And we started dating. He was from Vermont, and he always liked my writing. And he said, "Well, why don't you move back to Vermont, and you can try writing?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to give up dental insurance and a retirement plan and a salary to move back to Vermont unless you marry me." So I moved back in 1997, and we got married in 1998. So I couldn't find a job here in Killington, or in Rutland, and I did do some writing, but it's kind of hard to do writing when you don't have a deadline and you don't really know what you're doing. I tried to write a novel. It was really bad. It's in my closet. And one day in November, right after Thanksgiving, the Rutland Herald had a little ad in the newspaper for a ski writer. They needed somebody to cover. They wanted a weekly column about skiing, and they wanted somebody to cover at least one competition a week, a high school competition, a college competition. So I was hired, but not quite sure how, but I was hired. And my first competition that I covered was at Mountain Meadows, which was the cross-country ski area up at Killington. And there were a couple of guys coming to this race who wanted to be in the 1998 Olympics, which were coming up. So I went up to Mountain Meadows, and I met Mike and Diane Miller, and I watched the race. I interviewed people. And I drove home ready to start my story, and I sat down at my computer, and I was paralyzed. I did not know how to even start. And my husband said, "Is it okay if I use salty language?" Okay. I said, "Well, I don't know what to do." And he said, "Tell me why I should give a shit." In other words, tell me why this race was important. Why should I read your story? And it was actually one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. And every time I sit down now to write, I tell myself, why should the reader care about what I'm going to write? So from the Rutland Herald, I started getting other freelance work. And I got hired by Ski Racing magazine at the time to cover collegiate racing, you know, the Middlebury Carnival, the Dartmouth Carnival, the UVM Carnival. And I met a senior from Bowdoin College who asked if he could help me at these college races. And at first I was kind of like, what is this kid honing in on my job? I wasn't getting paid very well. I certainly didn't want to split my $50 with him. So I learned a second valuable lesson, and that is don't see people who your colleagues as competitors, see them as partners. So I said, sure, Nate, I'd love your help. And we became lifelong friends. And as in 2008, the US Olympic Committee wanted to relaunch their website. They were usoc.org, and they just had some boring press releases on it, and nobody ever went to it. And they'd hired a guy from Disney, and he said, if we look at the US Olympic Committee as a company, our product is Olympic athletes. And what we need to do is tell the public about our product. We need to hire journalists to tell the athlete stories. So the guy who was making the website was friends of this guy, Nate, from Bowdoin. And he asked if Nate could be one of the journalists writing. And Nate said, well, I can't. I just took a new job, but I know somebody who can. And that's how I started writing, getting into the Olympics and becoming an Olympic writer. So it was summer 2008. It was leading up to the summer Beijing Games. And one of the first stories I wrote, it's very hard to see, but this guy here is Andrew Weeding. He's a runner from Norwich, Vermont, and he made it to the Olympics, and he was one of the first stories I wrote, and he was just a great guy. I didn't actually get to go to Beijing that year. For every Olympics we go to, we have to get a credential, and this has to be applied for 2 years in advance. It's really, you have to wear this constantly, or except when you're in bed, you have to wear this, and it's really fun when the wind blows and smashes you in the face. So anyway, I couldn't get one of these for Beijing, so I had to cover those games from home. So my first Olympics was Vancouver, and I think everybody will tell you, from an athlete to a staff member, that their favorite Olympics, unless they went to the 2022 Games, their first Olympics will be their favorite. From opening ceremony, this is from the opening ceremony to closing, just everything was great. I stayed in comfortable hotels. Vancouver, the buses and train systems worked. People spoke English. The opening ceremony was just breathtaking, and you really had to be there to see. They created these just gigantic, I don't want to call them statues, they're works of art that were lit up, and it was just breathtaking to be there and to see the athletes walk in, and just the pageantry and the magic about it. The first competition, my first competition, was the first night of the games, was women's moguls, pouring rain. And there was a Vermonter, Hannah Carney. She was also from Norwich, who was favored to win. And she did win gold that night. And one of the reasons this is important for me, from my perspective, is as a journalist, in the fall of 2009, I had gone to Lake Placid, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes from here. And they have what's called the Olympic Jumping Complex. And in moguls and aerial skiing, they're always doing, they have to do flips and jumps. And you don't want to do that on the snow for the first time, because you'll probably end up in Rutland Regional. So they practice in pools, and they climb up the stairs, they go down these ramps, they do their twists and flips and turns, and they land in their skis in the pool. It's really something to see, and you can go over to Lake Placid and watch. And then they have to like breaststroke out of the pool with their skis on their feet. And they have lifeguards. Anyway, I sat and I watched Hannah train. And she must have gone up and down, I don't remember how many times she went up and down the ramp, maybe 15 times. And I counted each number of stairs she did. And I did the math, and I realized every day she was training here, she was climbing the Empire State Building. And I wrote that in my story, and I shared it with her. And she told me after she won gold in Vancouver that she knew she was going to win, because she was standing in the starting gate, and she said, I've climbed the Empire State Building every single day. I'm ready. So I thought, I was really touched with that I'd actually helped somebody. And she was invited to throw the first pitch out at Fenway. So bucket list item, I got to go on the field at Fenway. And other great highlights that happened. Another friend of the guy I got to know, well, this is Bodie Miller and Andrew Weibrecht. They won medals in skiing, and this was the first Olympics after Bodie had a terrible 2006 Olympics. He's really a pain in the neck to interview, but it was great to see him win. Andrew Weibrecht was so sweet. I ran into his coach. I chased his coach down in the stands after he won his medal, and he was telling me the funniest stories about how Andrew loved to ski so much as a little boy he would wet his pants rather than stop skiing to go in and use the bathroom. Then in Nordic Combined, which is one of the first Winter Olympic sports, it's ski jumping and cross-country skiing. I got to know these 4 men because they were trying so hard to win the first Olympic medal for the US in Nordic Combined, and they actually won 3 medals in those games. And the guy on the far left, Billy DeMong, he won a gold medal a few days later in an individual event. And he invited me to the USA House for a big party afterwards, and he proposed to his wife there. I got to cover the bobsled and luge. Well, I didn't cover luge, but bobsled. This guy, Stephen Holcomb, won the first gold medal for the US in men's 4-man bobsled in like 64 years. He was a great guy. So now a little bit about how I do my job. This is Ted Ligety. It's kind of a weird shot because it's called the mixed zone. And the competition, the ski hill is behind Ted over to the right. The finish line is right behind him. So when they finish their competition, they take their skis off or whatever. They come off, they get their coat. Then they have to go talk to what are called the rights holders. And these are the people, the companies, the TV companies that pay the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, billions of dollars. So NBC pays billions of dollars for the Olympics rights. So for their money, they get to talk to all the athletes immediately after they compete. But it's not just NBC, it's BBC, it's Serbian national television, it's Swiss national television. So they have to do all these interviews as we're waiting. Then when they're done that, then they talk to the wire services, the Associated Press and Reuters. Then they finally get to us, the lowly print people. And we're all kind of jammed in this one area. And it's called, I don't know why they call it the mixed zone. I think because we're mixing with the athletes. This is, it just sort of shows how cramped we are. This is Lindsey Vonn. Somebody asked her a question she didn't like. And if you miss them in the mixed zone or don't get everything you need, you can go to a press conference afterwards. This is Andrew Weibrecht at a press conference. But we try to avoid the press conferences because they're usually 2 to 3 hours after a competition, and we're supposed to get our stories done and submitted. So this is the end of Vancouver. Again, I went to closing ceremonies, and they just had these fabulous props, and they had giant beavers and moose, and it was just an incredible games. No, that's down in Vancouver in the big.
Okay, but where did they compete?
Well, the skiers in Vancouver, all the ice competitions, ice skating and hockey competed, and curling down in Vancouver, and all the ski competitions and sliding were in Whistler. So I was in both places, staying in fabulous accommodations. Oh. For my first summer games was London in 2012, which was 2 years later. The summer games are 3 to 4 times the size of the winter games, just 10,000 athletes, tons of sports, everything spread out. Again, the opening ceremonies was fabulous. You know, every country tries to tell their country's history through the opening ceremonies. So we had these crazy Dickensian creatures. And we got to see Mr. Bean and the Queen. I took this picture for my mother. She loves the Queen. And this is, they were showing the torch coming together. It was just a fabulous opening ceremonies. I spent most of my time in London at swimming, covering Michael Phelps. It was supposed to be his last Olympics. And Missy Franklin, she won 4 gold medals as a 17-year-old in swimming. And one of Michael's last competitions that we thought it was his last competition, we were interviewing in the mix zone, and they have TVs there too, because swimming has so many races going on every night that if you're interviewing somebody, you want to be able to watch the race, the other races going on TV. And I had my microphone here interviewing Michael, and I'm watching over here, and there's the women's 800 freestyle. And I had been writing a story about the death of women's freestyle because no American woman had done well in it. And suddenly there's this girl, this 15-year-old girl, who's beating everybody. And I was like, that won't last. And I interviewed Michael. And I still noticed she's beating people. And it was Katie Ledecky. So Michael got staged by a 15-year-old Katie Ledecky. Other bucket list items, I'm a tennis player. So they had the tennis competitions at Wimbledon. I cannot, because I work for the US Olympic Committee, we only cover Americans, but I love Roger Federer. So I went to his press conference after he lost to Andy Murray, and the European press was terrible to him. They were like, "You've let down your country, how do you feel?" And he was so gracious. He just sat there and he took it. They were just abusing him, it was awful. Then I went and I covered women's doubles, and Serena and Venus Williams were playing, and they won a gold medal, and they came into the mix zone, and Venus was lovely, Serena was not. I got to cover gymnastics, the women won gold, and then this is Usain Bolt. I could write about it, but I could take a picture of him winning the men's 100. Then Europe, or England, is kind of the cradle of rowing, and I watched the US women win gold in the women's 8. And then this mountain biker here, I met back when I worked at the Rutland Herald. She attended Middlebury College. She was a ski racer, and she won a ski race. She switched to mountain biking, and she competed in 2 or 3 Olympics. Leah Davison, she lives in Arlington, and she grew up in Jericho. So always a fun Vermont connection. Another bucket list item, I got to go to Wembley Stadium to cover women's soccer. Did not know much about soccer. This is another example, the picture on the left, it's another example of befriending people and considering them your partners and not your competition. That's Elliot Almond. He was a senior sports writer for the San Jose Mercury News. I met him the first day I worked in Vancouver. I sat on the bus next to him. And he's been a sports journalist forever. He's one of the reporters who broke the Balco case with doping with Marion Jones and Barry Bonds when he worked at the LA Times. So he kind of took me under his wing and helped me. And I sat next to him during soccer, and he just kept telling me what was going on. That was offsides. And I'm like, what's offsides? But US women won gold. And it was sort of a glimpse of, we didn't know it at the time, it was a glimpse of how the press and athletes were going to interact in the future. We waited for 2 hours for them to come into the mix zone. It was 12:30 at night. The last subway was at 1 a.m. We were completely on the other side of London, and they still hadn't come into the mix zone. And when they finally came in, they were like, oh yeah, hi. They just did not want to be talking to the media. The downside of London, we stayed, rather than putting us up in a hotel, a lot of the press got to stay at the University of East London in these silos that they use as dorms. My dorm room was about the size of a submarine, and if I dropped my soap in the shower, I couldn't pick it up. The worst part was that it was University of East London is here, the London City Airport is here. The jets would start taking off at 6 in the morning, and I often wouldn't get home from swimming till 3 in the morning, so I had to take sleeping pills. London was a great game, so I was very happy to get home. Those are my first summer and winter Olympics, both pretty good. Then we get into what I call the dark years. 2014 Winter Games in Sochi, 2016 Summer Games in Rio, 2018, Pyeongchang Winter Games. In South Korea was fine, but we were right on the border with North Korea, so there was a lot of talk about North Korea. Then we get into the 2 pandemic Olympics. So Sochi was Putin's games, and it doesn't take much imagination to wonder who designed that torch. We all got quite a titter out of that. There was if you think back 10 years ago, there was the big controversy before the Sochi Games was that a lot of the infrastructure was not done yet, including the hotels. So I got a call 2 days before I flew to Sochi, said, oh, by the way, your hotel isn't ready. We'll figure it out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Russia I have no place to stay. So I landed. I was picked up, luckily, by the U.S. Olympic Committee, and they took me up to a hotel. It turns out they got me a room at a 5-star Turkish resort. My room was almost half the size of this room. And a man introduced himself to me at breakfast one day as my butler. My sister writes for the Wall Street Journal, but she spent 10 years in Russia. She's fluent in Russian, so the Journal sent her to Sochi as well, not because she's a sports writer, but because she speaks Russian. She was staying down in the valley, and in the coast. I was up in the mountains, and she said he's probably a KGB agent. But every night I'd come back to my lovely, luxurious hotel room, and they'd put this weird art on my bed, and I got this delicious dessert, which saved me because the food in Russia was all gray. There were very few vegetables, no fruit, and we kind of joked that we were going to end up with scurvy by the end of the games. There were snipers in the woods, and to get to my luxury hotel in the mountains, there was no road. I had to take a gondola. And we finished late at night. I'd get back there at 1 or 2 in the morning to ride the gondola, and they'd be like, no, 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 no. Sometimes it was closed, and we'd ask why, and they say, technical disaster, technical disaster. And then there was this weird inflatable chicken that harassed people. A little bit more about how I do my job. It shows every Olympics has a main press center. It's usually the world's biggest convention center. It's where there's workspace for journalists. All the Olympic committees from around the world have offices there. The international broadcasting center's there, so it's where all the talking heads you see on TV are. There's some food. It's just a big place with help desks and help centers. But at every venue, so at ice skating, at skiing, at hockey, they have a work venue. It's usually like a big wedding tent, and there's some tables set up. You have internet access there. There's usually some food. Most of the time, it's not anything you want to eat unless you're desperate. And it shows the mix zone kind of in front of the athlete stands. Sochi highlights, again, I spent most of my time at alpine skiing. Ted Ligety won gold in alpine skiing. Andrew Weibrecht from Lake Placid won another medal. Steve Holcomb in bobsled won the first medal in 2-man bobsled for the US. And Julia Mancuso in her bronze dress won a bronze medal. And Michaela Schifrin won her first gold medal. She was 18 years old, and it was fun to see that. It was fun. Her parents were there, and we got to talk to them. And she looks in that picture. She's so young. Oh. So flying home from Sochi, honestly, couldn't wait to get out of there. Putin invaded Crimea 4 days before the Olympics ended. So there was a little bit of unease. We all wanted to get home. I was flying, as luck would have it, Ukrainian Airlines. From Sochi. Luckily, I didn't have to go through Kyiv. I had to go back to Moscow, and then I got, I think, Lufthansa home. But when you fly in the U.S. at night, you take off, and you look down. Everywhere you look, there's usually lights. You can see, little towns, little cities, whatever. Between Sochi and Moscow, there was nothing. It was black. It was creepy. I took off at 5 in the morning, so that's sunrise. So the next Olympics, we're coming up on summer now, 2016. Sometimes I get to cover Olympic trials. The trials are where they decide, the US competitors compete for a chance to go to the Olympics. I've often gotten to cover swimming Olympic trials. And in 2016, I got to meet a couple of my heroes. Does anybody remember the 1976 Olympics in swimming? The US women won a gold medal in the relay, the freestyle relay, and it was the only gold they won that year because they were competing against the East Germans who were doping, which we didn't know till, well, we knew then, but nobody talked about it till later. So she was always one of my heroes as a child. So I got to meet Shirley Babashoff. And then Debbie Myers was the only swimmer to have won gold medals in freestyle, 200, 400, and 800 until Katie Ledecky came along. So Rio, got to go down to Brazil, South America. You can see how happy I am in my credential from that year. We actually have to take pictures where you're not smiling because for security, they do facial recognition at all the games. Rio was not very much a welcoming place. I was flown into the wrong airport. I didn't speak any Portuguese. We were warned about the crime in Rio and told not to walk anywhere. So I took the bus from my hotel to the main press center, which was this black monolith. There was nowhere to walk. I was feeling like a caged animal. There was no food. We couldn't walk to any restaurants, so I had to scrounge around and eat the snacks that I could find at the main press center. And I didn't think about this, and I should have, but July in Brazil is winter. And I had all shorts and t-shirts, and I was freezing cold. Some highlights, I was back at swimming. We had Katie Ledecky. Simone Manuel was the first female black Olympian from the US to win a gold medal. Michael Phelps, again, his final games. And when they did open up Olympic Park, which was next to the main press center, I could walk. It was full of security, so we were safe walking from the main press center to wherever we had to work that night. And to get to swimming, I could cut through the tennis venue. It was a temporary tennis court. And I happened to bop in one day and I saw Rafael Nadal without a shirt on. And I posted that on Twitter and or X or whatever, and got lots of likes. I was sent to cover golf. I know nothing about golf. I finally did get to the beach in Rio for open water swimming and triathlon. And oops, USA House, which is where the US Olympic Committee brings athletes after they won medals to meet the sponsors, you know, Nike, the Nike executives, whatever major corporation is sponsoring the USOC. These people want to meet the Olympians. So they rent out a house. This was an office building right on Ipanema Beach. And it had a beautiful rooftop patio where I took this picture from. And I got some food with vegetables. Some lowlights. We're in a country where they don't have a lot of, let's just say they don't have the same building codes we do. I got locked in a bathroom at the rowing venue and I got stuck there for almost an hour. So I missed my races. They finally had to take the door off. And they only did that after I started crying. I got in a bus accident. Nobody was hurt, luckily. I got locked out of my hotel room one night. I had to sleep in my clothes, but I was staying in the same hotel as the Sports Illustrated writers, and one of them gave me a sleeping pill so I could at least sleep in my clothes through the night. The stadiums were set up with scaffolding, and you just sat there praying that the bolts had been tightened. And I did come down with a cold, and I went to a pharmacist, and I mimed my symptoms, and he gave me a bottle, and I had no idea what it was, but it worked. And it was only $6. I finally got a morning off, and I decided to go see the Christ the Redeemer statue. And I waited in line. I swear it took me 4 hours to get there, and it sort of summed up my Rio games. And this is just an interesting aside. There's a lot of condoms at the Olympics. In the main press center, I found a dispenser of condoms, and I got one, and I thought it was so funny. So I survived Rio, got home. 16 months later, we're going now to South Korea for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. I took this picture out my window. I flew Burlington to Detroit and then Detroit to Seoul. And this is flying over Siberia. And I would soon find out that the winds from Siberia hit South Korea. Rather than staying in hotels, South Korea had built a big apartment complex, and they called it the Media Village. A lot of people ask me, what's the Olympic Village like? There is no Olympic Village. They think of Currier and Ives. There's no Olympic Village. The athletes stay in the Olympic Village, and they are segregated from everybody. The media, in this case, stayed in a media village. And it was just a bunch of apartments. We each got our own apartment with these just horrible beds. I think it was a slab of cement. I had to put my down coat underneath it to make it comfortable. But it was, it was nice. You could see your colleagues every day. They had a laundromat in this media village. And they had a nice cafeteria that was open 24/7 with all sorts of food. And I was down there eating breakfast one day with my friend Sandy from Lake Placid. He's the USA Luge officer. And we were eating our eggs, and he looked around and he said, "I think we're in a parking garage." And we were. But the buses worked well. The main press center was in the mountains and had some kind of weird art. Maybe you'd understand it, Carolyn. I never did. So this is an opening ceremonies now where we're getting away from those breathtaking, magnificent, you know, gotta see it in person, stagecraft. And now we're seeing what's become more common now, where they're doing light shows, which are more made for TV. So I think the opening ceremonies are magnificent on TV. But I was sitting there, it was 30 below zero, and there's just lights. And the 2018 games were the first ones where the Russians were not allowed to compete. Only Russian athletes who could claim they were not part of that systematic doping program could compete as unaffiliated athletes. Well, the Russians were quite upset about this, so they hacked into the internet on the opening ceremonies. And my job was to tweet that night, and I couldn't get on Twitter, so I left. Because I was freezing cold. It's the coldest I've ever been, and I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom. It was like this cryogenic freezer with the wind coming down from Siberia. I spent a lot of time at cross-country skiing because I wrote a book about the US women's cross-country team that had just come out, and didn't know they were going to win a gold medal at that games, but Jessie Diggins and Keegan Randall in the team sprint won gold. That's Keegan on the right, and that's her mother in the middle holding a bigger than life-size head of Keegan. It was such a big deal. They also competed the same night as the men, and the Norwegian men, in that lower right photo, they're on the right, they're rock stars. They're like LeBron James in Norway and Europe. And they're used to, you know, when they win a race, the waters part before them, and people are like, oh. Well, at this Olympics, there's 200 people in the press conference, and nobody's asking them a question. So Kleibo's sitting there with his fingers up his nose, which I thought was hilarious. Also, Michaela Schifrin had another good Olympics. And there were some Vermonters, more Vermonters in Pyeongchang. On the left there's some athletes, biathletes, and cross-country skiers. And on the right, there's Doug Lewis. He grew up in Middlebury. He's a commentator. We hear him at Killington. Me, Reese Brown from Woodstock. And he was the Nordic press officer. And the guy with the beard is the publisher of Backcountry magazine. There's the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, and they ran a tour there one day. I didn't realize you could go to the DMZ on a tour. It was very interesting. The border's right there on the beach, up there by that little island. There was all this weird art, more weird art. They'd taken ordnance and made these kind of crazy statues, and there's a gift shop at the DMZ. I thought was very ironic. So that was 2018. Now we advance to the COVID Olympics. Tokyo 2020 was actually Tokyo 2021. You know, we thought by spring 2021 the vaccine was available, and we thought, okay, this will be all right. We're going to make it. But Tokyo did not want hundreds of thousands of people coming from all over the world with, you know, goodness knows what diseases. So they mandated COVID tests constantly, and even before we left home, and we had to do it with Japanese-approved labs. So we'd get all these COVID test kits in the mail, and we had to take pictures of ourselves, giving ourselves this was actually my Christmas card that year. It was so, and once you got the green lights, you would be sent a QR code, and you weren't allowed into the country unless you had a QR code. But you also needed another QR code. You had to fill out all this crazy paperwork, but if they weren't keeping on top of it. Anyway, it was a pain in the neck to get into Tokyo. And once we were there, we had to spit into these vials every day for COVID tests. We had to be tested daily. And if you tested positive for COVID, you were going to be confined to your hotel room. And my hotel room was the size of my closet. And I am a little claustrophobic, so I was quite nervous about getting testing positive for COVID, but we were all masked up, so we just hoped we would be okay. I had no view, and we weren't allowed to leave our rooms, so there was quite a concern about how we were going to eat. And we finally found out that the hotel would serve us breakfast, but we had to walk down in the morning with our mask on, and they'd give us a little box, and we'd have to take it back to our room to eat it. And the box was, one morning it was these little shish kebabs, another morning it was pizza, another morning we got eggs, and it just cycled through. We'd always get a salad for breakfast, so at least we were getting vegetables. Just, you know, you did it, it was okay, but it was not ideal. For the rest of the meals, we were allowed to go to the 7-Eleven, which was right adjacent to the hotel, but we were allowed 15 minutes. And you had to go to the lobby of the hotel. There was an armed guard there. You had to sign out with your name, and he'd press a stopwatch. And if you were not back within 15 minutes, you were going to be sent home. So it was like a game show. And we were on the 7th floor, so you had to take the elevator down. And then, I mean, you know, you're reading Japanese. I don't know Japanese. One day I came home with squid and broccoli, which is actually pretty good. But most of the time I ate what I brought from home. I brought a suitcase full of food from home. And ironically, the 7-Eleven had a huge liquor section, of which I did not partake, although I thought about it. But we did find when we got to the main press center, there was a bus that would meet us right outside the hotel that would squirrel us to the main press center. It was a very wide open convention center with room to roam, and the bus depot it would drop you off was about a half-mile walk. So we weren't as caged as we thought we would be. A lot of gold medals in Tokyo, Katie Ledecky, Caleb Dressel in swimming, Allison Felix, her last Olympics, beach volleyball. I did cover tennis one night, and I covered the US mixed doubles in the bronze medal match. And I asked the guys, you know, because tennis, their big events are Grand Slams. And I said, well, what was it like competing in the Olympics? Were you happy to be here? But they're used to competing in front of fans. And one of the guys said, I felt like I was competing in a cornfield in Iowa. Because there was look here, there's nobody in the stands. And this is the Djokovic match against Medvedev. So it was just weird. Misery breeds camaraderie because we were not allowed, they were trying to keep people out of these packed mix zones. You had to get there and you had to get a pass. Well, not everybody could get a pass. So rather than being competitive with each other, we all had to work together. And if one of us got a press pass, we would just have to share the audio with our compatriots. So, you know, this picture on the right is me with a woman from USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and the LA Times, and we just were working together. We shared questions, and I like working that way. I'm sure they don't, but I really enjoyed it. And the picture on the left are two of my colleagues. We just decided to go down on the track on the last night and run around the track and take our masks off. So despite the challenges, Tokyo was still a pretty good Olympics. And the final night after closing ceremonies, we weren't supposed to go anywhere in Tokyo. My colleagues and I took the subway to the end of the line, and we came out and we saw this beautiful temple at midnight, and we thought, oh, what are they going to do, send us home? And the next day I tried to go home, but my flight was delayed 22 hours. So you can see where it says yesterday. Then we get to the Beijing Olympics. So we thought, well, they survived. We got through Tokyo, and that worked out pretty well. Surely, with another year and a half under our belts with COVID, you know, surely the Chinese have COVID figured out. But things were even more strict. We learned a lot about how China works. We all had to fly to Los Angeles. All the US athletes, everybody from the US had to go to Los Angeles, stay in Los Angeles for 3 days at a hotel airport and be tested for COVID by Chinese labs. And the tests that they did were the back of the throat, so got to gag every day. And once we were cleared and got the QR code, we got on a flight that took us from LA to Japan. And then from Tokyo, remember there were no flights going into China in that time, we had to get on chartered flights. So we got on a chartered flight that landed us in Beijing in the middle of the night, where we were met by the welcoming committee in hazmat suits and more COVID testing. So we couldn't get out of the airport till we'd had more COVID tests. Beijing was divided into 3 zones. We had the Beijing zone where we had hockey, the ice sports, hockey, figure skating, curling. Yangqing in the middle, which is where alpine skiing and sliding was, and Zhangjiakou up in the corner where the Nordic sports were, and I think moguls and aerials. Those were connected by a high-speed rail that the Chinese were very proud of. And it was all supposed to be easy to get around, but because we weren't allowed to get to the train station, we had to rely on a bus system that they hadn't thought out very well. But anyway, I got to my hotel that first night. It turned out to be a decent place. Had a very comfortable room, plenty of room to stretch out. And if I was going to be confined to my hotel, at least I wouldn't go crazy. I had a view. For breakfast, we were allowed to go down to the hotel breakfast and eat in a little protected, you could take your mask off, but you couldn't talk to anybody. But you couldn't walk out. The hotel was surrounded by fence and basically razor wire. So it was pretty clear that we were in this hotel room, and if you left the hotel, you were going to be, things were not going to go well for you. I actually walked outside the hotel. This is right outside the front door the first day, because I'd been wearing an N95 mask for 42 hours, and I just wanted some fresh air, and I was chased by a policeman. The lobby had a lot of robots over there. This robot on the left is spraying, we're not quite sure what. And the robot on the right was actually a highlight of the games for me. If you ordered room service, it would deliver your room service and talk to you in English. And sometimes it was the only thing that talked to me all day. There was another restaurant in the hotel where we could get vegetables, so. So anyway, back to the transportation in Beijing was a real challenge. Had we been able to walk to this train station, it would have been easy for me to get to the cross-country venues. But we weren't. You had to take a bus to a bus hub, to a bus, to a train, to a bus, to a bus. It was ridiculous. It took, it hadn't been thought out. So they created a bus schedule, which, as you can see, you needed a magnifying glass to read. And the bus schedule changed every day, but nobody told you. And the bus stops changed every day. This is the main bus hub, and I don't know why I took the picture of the back of the bus. One day, because they changed the bus stop, I got off at the wrong place, and the venue that I needed to go to was just a mile away. So I asked if I could walk, and they said no. I had to get back on the bus, go 2 hours back to where I started, get on another bus, come back 2 hours, and get on the right stop. So what did I do? I fell on the ground and I cried. And they got me a taxi, but in this taxi, I was completely encased in a bubble. But I didn't care. Beijing, they built a lot of tunnels and a lot of infrastructure that I hope is getting used. Oh, and the buses were not heated. So I'm spending 2 hours on a bus that is not heated. It's freezing cold. So a lot of this crazy infrastructure that they built, this is the Alpine venue, taking a gondola up. And if I didn't want to take the gondola, I could take a bus on this road. I chose the gondola. I think China wanted to show off their skiing. I think they want people to come skiing in China. If you're skiing in China, it's kind of not very friendly looking. That was the downhill course, and that was the slalom and giant slalom course where poor Michaela Schifrin spent time in tears. You just had to wear an N95 mask everywhere. So a friend of mine, when I'm over there, said, hey, you can tell how your week is going if you look at your most used emojis. So I just took a screenshot, and I thought it was funny. You've got the guy there, the guy swearing a lot. You got the freezing cold guy. You got the robot, the person with a hand over the face, but no poop emoji, which is probably a good sign. I did go into Beijing one day. I had to go to the main press center to get some computer help. And if you look at the very top of that ridge, I got to see the Great Wall. That's the main press center, and that was the torch they used for the 2008 Olympics. Beijing, to me, though, we're used to cities like New York or Boston where there's one big center and tall buildings. Beijing is just this giant spread out city. I think it was like the size of Vermont. And this is Beijing. I'm in Beijing, but it was a massive city with very spread out. Highlights, Vermonter Ryan Cochran-Siegel won a medal. Michaela Schifrin, even though she didn't win a medal, was just lovely. She's always lovely to talk to. I spent a lot of time again at cross country with Jessie Diggins winning some medals, even though I sometimes, one night I got left off at a bus stop with nobody in the middle of the night And I didn't know if another bus was going to come along, and I couldn't call a taxi. It was a very scary experience because you felt completely out of control, and I still have bad dreams about it. A couple more American medals in bobsled, just some random pictures. The volunteers were very delightful people, even though they couldn't help you at all, but they built snowmen, and they created these little snow ducks, which I thought was cute. This is a colleague of mine. I'd never met her. I'd worked with her online and over the phone. And we were together in Beijing, and we'd never even seen what each other looked like. So we were on the same flight home. The very last minute, we took our masks off, took a picture, put our masks back on. Flying home, full moon over the Northwest Territory. And a friend of mine sent me this little kitty. So when you're having a tough time, it's always fun to look at a cute kitty. So finally, we get to Paris this summer, glorious Paris, no COVID tests, no quarantine, no threat of being sent home, no QR codes. The biggest challenge was figuring out the Paris metro. And I was working with a young woman too, who we had some challenges just with trying to figure out what we were doing, but great, stunning venues in Paris. I got to go to Roland Garros, which is where they have the French Open, the clay courts. They had fencing and taekwondo in the Grand Palais, which is this magnificent palace. The Arc de Triomphe was lit up. Just incredible. They had beach volleyball in front of the Eiffel Tower. And even though there was nothing at the Louvre, they had, if you turned around from the pyramid, they had the Olympic torch right adjacent to it. And it was the first Olympics where I gained weight. We could go to restaurants. We could go to the patisseries and boulangeries. Any restaurant I went into was just a delightful meal. Of course, it's the Olympics, so they didn't seem to think that signage was important, so we never quite knew where the entrance to buildings was. Whereas I had been freezing on the buses in Beijing because they weren't heated, the buses in Paris were not air conditioned, so they were very hot. And the opening ceremonies, it rained quite a bit. I don't know if anybody watched on television. So I'm sitting in the rain. I'm literally sitting in a puddle because I'm sitting in a plastic chair. And my daughter texts me and says, "Oh, Mom, you're going to get to see Lady Gaga in person." And I look up and Lady Gaga is on a TV screen in front of me, and I'm sitting in a puddle, and I'm like, this is not an opening ceremonies that's made for people in person. It's a made-for-TV game. So I took my laptop, which was getting very wet, and I went into the press center, and I worked from there. Oh, and I got an eye infection, and I discovered the main press center has a free doctor. It was delightful. I got to see a lot of fun. I covered a lot more swimming. That picture on the right is Ellie St. Pierre. She's a Vermonter who competed in the 1500. That top picture is Simone Biles competing in her last, we think it's her last Olympics. That's the floor exercise. And my brother-in-law, that lower picture, that's one of his best friends from high school, and her daughter won 2 gold medals in cycling. So I met her and chatted with her. I went to rowing, where boys in the boat, they're US 4, won the first gold medal. They were delightful guys. One was a rocket scientist with a bachelor's from Harvard and a master's in astrophysics from Oxford. Coco Gauff at tennis was delightful. The whole tennis team, and Katie Ledecky was as great as ever. Did anybody see this Paris mascot? The first time I saw it, I thought it was either an inflamed organ or it was a blood donor site. And the last night we went down, my friend and I went down on the track. So I thought I'd talk about how the games have changed from when I first started in 2010, 2012 to now. We're still in the mix zone, we're still crowded in the mix zones, but the athletes no longer want to come and talk to the press. They have what are called press officers, like agents, and they no longer want to help the press. They want to protect the athletes from the press. And the athletes are supposed to talk, they're supposed to come through the mix zone, but they don't have to talk. And a lot of them just didn't want to talk. And what they're doing now is they're communicating with their fans through social media, through Instagram. So we've become kind of the bad guys. We're standing in these hot, crowded mix zones for trying to get our stories, and we're just getting little tidbits here and there, waiting forever. And it particularly exemplified that the competition in the upper left corner was the triathlon mixed relay, and the U.S. won a silver medal. And there was a woman in that race who had a disappointing Olympics until then. She had not done well in a cycling event or in triathlon. She was talking to us with a medal around her neck. She finally won a medal, and just not happy. And I was trying to cheer her up, and I said, well, are you excited to go back to the athlete village and watch some other competitions? And she's like, I just want to get out of here. I didn't want to go back to that disease-filled village, and I don't even want to be talking to you people. And I said, I don't want to be talking to you either. I just this attitude of the press is something of the past, and maybe we are. I think people, they want to tell their stories through like those Netflix documentaries. There's been one on Simone Biles, kind of like that Drive to Survive Formula One. And it's a great way to tell the story, but it takes a lot more than one reporter with a recorder to tell a video story than a newspaper story. So one of my last days in Paris, I just wrote something funny on my blog called Game of Life. Did anybody play the Game of Life when they were younger? Olympic Journalist Edition. And you could either be the broadcast journalist, where you stay in a 5-star hotel, you're given a driver, you collect $5,000 each payday, and you advance to hair and makeup, and then you skip from payday to payday. Or you're a print journalist like me, where you stay in a 2-star dump, you're given a Metro card, you collect $100 each payday, and you advance to the main press center. Then I had things like board train going the wrong direction, lose a turn. Catch infectious disease, lose 2 turns. Miss an athlete in the mix zone, skip over the next payday. Cover 3 events in 1 day and lose 100 mental health points. Cell phone battery low, lose a turn. Share mix zone audio with other journalists, make a friend, earn 100 mental health points. And then I had go to the airport at the end. Flight delayed, lose remaining mental health points. Or score upgrade, gain 100 mental health points. And then the day of reckoning was cash in your mental health points. If greater than 0, go to the next Olympics. So that's the end of my presentation.